Healthcare in senior care is fraught with problems and challenges, but we're also seeing some amazing new clinical treatments and resources. This show will help illuminate and uncover the good, bad, and the ugly in order to equip patients, families, and other healthcare providers. Welcome to Senior Care Confidential. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Senior Care Confidential. I'm here with my friends Justin and Michelle. Oftentimes, following a crisis in a hospital, there's a lot of anxiety. The family member might not be ready to go home yet, and so there's this transitional period where we're trying to figure out what's the best steps for them before they come home, and we can make sure that they're safe. And so Justin and Michelle, join me from PAM Rehab, and so we're here to discuss inpatient rehab and the implications of that, who might qualify for that, and what the results of that kind of a setting are. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan.
It's our pleasure.
What is inpatient rehab or post-acute rehab? How would you define that?
Yeah, so it's an acute care setting that is very therapy driven, very therapy intensive. We do 3 hours of therapy daily between multiple disciplines of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, depending on the patient's needs. We see an onslaught of different diagnoses across orthopedics, musculoskeletal, neuro, pulmonary, cardiac, a multitude of diagnoses. Right?
Kind of the gambit, yeah.
A majority of our patients are geriatric. Yeah. We will get some traumas, orthopedic traumas that can be younger, or, traumatic brain injury or stroke or things of that nature where it can be a younger population, but a majority are geriatrics.
Okay. And these are people primarily that have probably had, although I know you do some direct admits from the house, which we'll get to in a second. Yep. But these are primarily people who've had some sort of be it a medical complication or an injury or a recent surgery, and they just aren't quite functional or safe enough to go home yet. And this is kind of an in-between, kind of a more intensive rehab than they're even going to get in a hospital. Is that kind of what this is?
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. Yeah. So in the hospital setting, it's more about evaluating for next placement of care, right? So, we've kind of moved away from the traditional hospital kind of stay where you're getting a lot of therapy to where now they're just identifying placement and saying what's safe for a discharge. And the individuals that seem to come to us most often are those who were high functioning before, who have for somewhat a reason some kind of deconditioning, whether it be from disease pathology or from some kind of traumatic injury or surgery.
Okay.
And they might not be safe to go home, or they're not high enough functioning level where it's appropriate for them to go home.
Okay.
And they might need more medical management as well.
Yeah. So the acute care the hospital setting is really there for treating the acute, like the scary stuff, right? It's getting them stabilized, making sure that whatever medical complications or whatever's happened is corrected enough to where medically they're probably safe enough to leave that setting. But like you said, that's not really where the rehab, the functional stuff is happening. It's really downstream from there, and that's where you guys are utilized. Mm-hmm. So I saw a recent statistic that said something like 62 million people in the United States, or 1 in 4 Americans, have some sort of a disability, and another 42 million are caregivers of people with a disability. So I can see a use case. In fact, we've used you guys several times where we've had family members that are concerned about mom or dad going home. And it doesn't matter whether mom or dad's living with them or mom or dad are living in an assisted living or even on their own with like private duty care. They recognize from the hospital that there's no way this is going to be safe for them to return home. And so that's why we've referred to you before, because there's that good transition where we buy them another period of time. We'll talk about the period of time in a second. A period of time where we can get them safer, more functional, so that it's a more appropriate discharge to back home.
Yes, and we want our patients to be able to come into PAM and to be able to go home and age in place.
Yeah.
So that's where you're starting to say about the length of stay. So we're 7 to 14 days.
Okay.
Our average length of stay is 10 to 11 right now.
Right. In-house right now it's 12.
Is that driven by the clinical makeup of the patient, or is that driven more through regs and reimbursement, or how does Medicare define what that time frame is, or is that more what your therapists and your doctors see in the facility and they're going, okay, this is the most appropriate time frame?
So Medicare and these different health entities, it could be a commercial payer.
Okay.
But Medicare kind of sense the trends for the market, but based on the diagnoses, and if they have multiple diagnoses, they will be put in a case mix index,
okay,
right, where they classify them, and based on that presentation, across all of Medicare, they've identified this is the typical length of stay, right?
Yeah.
So they will, give you an allotment or authorize so many days based on that diagnoses and the comorbidities, right? And so we're given that number, and based on their function is when we discharge. So we might go past that number. We might be before that number. At the end of the day, we want to get people home safely.
Correct.
Right. So that's the most important to us is patient care. So, we call them barrier days. When we go past that number, we're, the way they pay us is they give us a lump sum for those number of days.
Okay.
Right. Let's say it's 18 days. Well, if we go to 27 days, that's 9 unpaid days, because it's just a lump payment.
But you guys are doing it anyway because the ultimate goal is we want the patient to thrive back at home. And so if 100%. We need a few more days on this, then we'll eat the cost on that. We were going to get into payers later, but since you brought it up, on the payer side of it, what are you guys seeing different? Because I know, so as a home health provider, we see this a lot too. And a lot of times the family members don't know, the seniors don't know. I mean, shoot, I've interviewed a bunch of insurance reps too who aren't aware of some of the benefits and the consequences, because there's both, of like Medicare Advantage plans, or in other words, a Medicare replacement plan. And so we have a lot of patients that we work with who we'll get orders for, and they're thinking they're on original Medicare, but they're actually on an Advantage plan. And there's some misgivings or some misconceptions on what they do and don't cover. Are y'all running into the same kind of issue with Medicare Advantage versus original Medicare at the rehab level too?
Yeah, absolutely. The families are unaware that the patient has actually switched over to an Advantage plan. And so they'll say that they're coming into PAM with the Medicare, a traditional Medicare. And when we actually run the benefits, they're actually, an Advantage plan. So those are really tricky. I'm actually in the secondary markets, which means I work with the home health, the ILs, independent livings, and the assisted livings, and the doctor's office, which they discharge from home, or they are being seen from home. And so with that being said, we can take Medicare the same day, so I can get those patients in if they have a medical diagnosis and they have the 2 out of 3 disciplines, and we can get them in that day. But if they don't, then I have to set them up with the home health, and that's where that continuum of care comes in, and I set you up, and then we talk about how to get them in and what needs to be done. And sometimes they feel like they should be getting in right away, but there's a process and procedures, and everyone feels like it's Burger King. They should have it their way. They can just walk in and come to a hospital. Yes, we're a hospital. We run like a hospital. So we definitely have
But procedures. The payer sources sometimes create other hoops for y'all to jump through if they're going to accept them. So even if they're going to accept them, there are still other things you guys have to do. Are there limitations that you see within like the days? I know Medicare sets a certain amount of days. Are you finding the same kind of thing on the Medicare Advantage, or not so much?
They're all the CMGs, the CMIs. They still grade them the same. They still pay on the same pay scale. We just have to jump through more hoops and get them authorized. So I think if I am clarifying what you just kind of said is, if they're the traditional Medicare, we don't have to jump through as many hoops. We can get them in same day. But if they're not, and they're on one of these Advantage plans, that's where we have to, get creative and wait for authorization, jump through the different hoops, provide more, clinical paperwork and information about their presentation. And we just have to really justify it on the front end to get them in. With Medicare, traditionally it's been a little bit easier of a process. And I've heard of examples where some of these, family members' parents or the patients themselves, where they don't even know they're not on traditional Medicare. And what happens is they receive paperwork saying, hey, you're going to be put on this Advantage plan unless you opt to stay with traditional Medicare.
We've seen
I've heard stories of that. I don't know if that's rampant.
We've seen that.
But, that's why they're completely unaware, because they didn't read it thoroughly and say, hey, no, I want to stay on traditional Medicare.
And I'm gonna have another guy on an upcoming show that's going to discuss more on that. But we see that stuff too. So I figured for the audience too, for them to be aware, we do see things as providers. There is a difference in the flexibility within original Medicare versus some of the Medicare Advantage plans. And some of the Medicare Advantage plans are fine. We work with a number of them, and they're completely reasonable, and we don't really have to jump through as many hoops. But by and large, original Medicare seems to be the easiest one to kind of work through. And there are outcomes. I know we're going to talk about outcomes in a minute, but there are positive outcomes if you have somebody moving through an aspect of what we call the post-acute continuum is anything outside the hospital. So the hospital, which is acute care, and then anything, whether it's skilled nursing facility, rehab, home health, those are considered post-acute after the hospital. And there is data on there that shows engaging in those type of services following a hospital stay has shown to create savings for the payer source, whether it's Medicare or it's Medicare Advantage. In short, though, for y'all, like the big focus is getting them reintegrated back into in a senior's case, back into the home or their whatever community they're in. And in some cases, you guys are even working with some younger folks who the reintegration might actually be back to work. Do y'all see some of those as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we work with all of them. So we want to make sure that they go home again and we age in place, or they go back to work in a timely manner. So we want to get them. I mean, I admit, sometimes 52-year-olds. Scary because I'm 50. So, but we want to get them back, and we have great success stories for that all over the PM, industry.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about if in a scenario, let's take like an 87-year-old grandmother, right? She's falls, has a hip fracture. She goes through, emergency room to surgery. She's going to spend a couple nights in the hospital, probably following, pin and screw placement. And then they're going to send them to y'all's rehab facility, and she's there for her 10 to 12 days or whatever that is. If at some point the progress is too slow, or it's still pretty clear that she's not ready, is there another option, like skilled nursing facility can be an option? It's kind of almost like another step down unit. What's the difference between y'all and skilled nursing facility? Like a rehab and skilled nursing? Yeah.
So skilled nursing facility, the big misconception is that we are the same, and we are not. We are post-acute medical, which we are the next level of care. And so if you have a chance to go into seeing us, I would highly recommend it, because sometimes the case managers aren't aware that we can actually do an assessment right there at the hospital and make that assumption and make that assessment for them and let them know. So always be a patient advocate for your loved one.
Yeah.
We strive on, again, I can't express enough, like having continuum of care and getting the patient home. So knowing those differences are like the education is what is needed, as we've talked about, and being so overwhelmed with everything. Is it
because SNF is less intensive? Is that why you're such an advocate for the post-acute rehab side?
Yes, because we have the 3 hours of hours.
That's where I was going.
We have the 3 hours of therapy, which is physical therapy, occupational, and speech. We have 24-hour respiratory therapist on site. We have a doctor that rounds every single day. We have in-house pharmacy, in-house labs. We are traumatic brain injury certified. We are stroke certified and Parkinson's certified.
Wow.
In-house dialysis as well.
And in-house dialysis.
One of the differences, that I've seen is at the skilled facility, they'll have physicians that round, but they just kind of swing by, see everybody. We have physicians that we employ that are there every day. Like
they're seen daily versus like weekly or bi-weekly.
But they're also on site.
Yeah.
All day long. Right. And then we have physicians like specialists that round, like neurologists and orthopedists and nephrologists that will come by that are specialized. But our PM and our doc is full-time staff on site all the time. And, like she touched on with the therapy, in my mind, and I could be wrong, in my thought process, but skilled nursing facilities are more nursing driven, and PDPM kind of changed that, whereas before they used rugs and it was very therapy driven, it's kind of changed to be more nursing driven, just from the payment model. And, that operationally has kind of changed the navigation route as well. But medical management, you're leaving post-acute, you're leaving the hospital, you're either too low functioning prior, or maybe you just need more medical management. Maybe skilled nursing is appropriate.
Gotcha.
But if you're high functioning,
that helps,
and you want to go home, I think inpatient rehab is honestly the best choice. But there is data from specific skilled nursing facilities where you can potentially go home, where they're getting a high number home, but it depends on their business model, right? A lot of them will stay for their 100 days Part A, and then they'll switch into long-term care because that business model for that specific entity is they have a skilled side and they have a long-term side.
Okay.
And so those individuals will become residents, right? And they'll stay there and live there and age in place there, right? Where we don't have any long-term care at our site. We do have long-term care facilities within our company nationally, but not at, Pam Allen, Pam Richardson.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so you want those patients to get right from the hospital to get that post-acute care so they can go home.
Yep.
That's where we're getting those patients that are higher acuity patients, but we're also taking them. So as long as they can do the therapy, right?
Yep.
So we want them to be able to go home. And what Justin was saying is we want them to go back to the community. They want to go back to the IALs and the ILs, and
That's
they want
right.
to go back, to their home. Because sometimes they live home alone, but they can have the home health and they can have the home care where you step in and where our other entities come in, and then they can age in place. Because a lot of them, they're seniors. They want to go home. They want to drink their wine. They want to have their coffee in the morning. They have the routine. And that's what I guess a post-acute, I would say post-acute medical advocate, because I want those families to go home and be able to age in place, and I want them to be happy.
Yeah.
And so our goal is not to keep them. We want them to get them better, and we want them to age in place. And then again, when you guys pick them up.
Yeah. And you want them to move quickly, which is why you guys do such intensive therapy. So on a previous podcast, I had a friend of mine who's from Florida. Actually, you're from Florida as well. But he is a personal trainer that is, I think he's got a geriatric specialized or something. He's got a degree in gerontology as well. And so he works with a bunch of independent living communities. And so he and I were talking about some recent statistics. There was a study that was done, I think it was last year, and they looked at two groups of seniors, both 65 plus, and they looked at one group, and they put one group through exercise, and it was a 5-month long. They did some nutritional stuff too, so they made sure that their protein was dialed in and that kind of stuff. But for 5 months, they led them through resistance training exercises, and the average participant gained roughly 2.5 pounds of muscle mass, which for a 65 plus year old is
awesome.
Is phenomenal. Yeah, I have a hard time doing that at 45. So, but they did fantastic. And then maybe I need their trainer. And then on the other side, they put this other group, this plus 65-year-old group, in a hospital, essentially a hospital bed. And they just said, we just want you to be bedbound for the next 10 days. In 10 days, they lost the equivalent amount of what it took the other group to gain in 5 months. And so to y'all's point, there is a very strong use case for if we're not getting the rehab, as you said, in acute care, right? So if we've shifted the business model away from using acute care, a lot of therapy in acute care, which we see all the time. It's one of my biggest things when I'm talking with families is make sure they get therapists coming out there, at least to get them out of the bed, get them in a recliner or something. Just getting them out of the bed stimulates the body to stay stronger longer, and we avoid some of the deleterious effects of being in the hospital. But to your point, if we can get them from acute care to a post-acute rehab hospital like PAM, then with the intensity that you guys are doing, and I'm sure they're out of bed much more often than just the 3 hours they're doing therapy, then we can curb a lot of that decline that we would normally see from somebody who's bedbound. And to your point, in some of these cases where they're not medically sick enough to not go to a rehab hospital, they're going like a skilled nursing facility, the rehab is a lot less intensive. And in some cases, that's completely appropriate for them. But the downside of that is they may spend too much more of their time in the hospital room itself or the bed itself, and precipitating more of that decline. Yeah,
and when you get that patient that can actually do when you actually get a patient that actually can go into post-acute and that can manage that 3 hours of therapy, and if they go to skilled, like for instance, I just had a patient that was wanting to come. Well, I had a referral that was supposed to come from a skilled nursing facility.
Yeah.
And they basically laid in bed all day and they were trying to come to us. Well, by then the insurance got denied. They declined so much that they couldn't come to us anymore. And so that patient could no longer go home. So the family's frustrated because they lost that opportunity. They lost that window, and they're like, where did we go wrong? And it's like, it's the education. Yeah. People need to be educated to know that you need to fight for your family member. And I'll do that the day is long. Yeah. I mean, everybody at PAM knows that I'll fight for my patients.
And that's why I have you guys on this podcast too, is to help identify, there's a lot of pieces of the medical industry that a lot of people just aren't aware of, or they are aware of it, but they don't realize how crucial it is. So, utilizing a post-acute rehab hospital after hospitalization stay for the right person is huge. It's a huge benefit for them going back home because of how intensive it is. And I know you guys mentioned you have multiple disciplines there. You've got respiratory therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and PT. And are they doing 3 hours a day, 5 days a week?
Yeah. So they get 900 minutes, so 5 days a week.
Okay.
If they miss it on one day, we make it up on another. So it could be 6 or 7 days of therapy.
Okay.
Just depending on if they got their minutes.
Okay.
If we're talking about the differences between skilled nursing, right? So at skilled nursing, if they're Part A, like the reimbursements for them, which kind of drives what they do operationally, they might be getting 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, 3 days a week.
Right.
It depends. right? And then once they go to, I believe, Part B, it changes as well, like the amount of meds they can use, right? So, but big takeaway is it's less than rehab, right?
Yeah.
And so depending on the patient's presentation, there's a lot of studies out there that show, post-acute stroke, outcomes are dramatically better if you go to rehab first,
Totally.
right? So you're going to have
100%.
a huge increase in function to get back to their previous level of function, as opposed to going somewhere where they're not as therapy intensive,
Yep.
right? Just from like the neuroplasticity standpoint,
Yeah.
right? And we get patients who come to us who don't have stroke or anything like that. They might have a UTI in the hospital, and they're confused. They're a little delirious when they come to us. They're weaker and deconditioned from being in the hospital. And their family members will say, like, we don't know what's going on. They're just not themselves, and they're so much weaker. Am I going to get my loved one back?
Yeah.
And then 10 to 12 days later, they're much higher level functioning. Cognitively, they're back to who they were. Their personality comes back. They like the lights come back on.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, thank you so much for everything y'all did.
Absolutely.
And so we get those great rewarding stories like that. So
My mom, hello.
case in point, right? But yeah, so when talking about like who's the appropriate inpatient rehab patient, it's going to be individuals that were high functioning before.
Okay.
And we have this narrow window of time that we can take advantage of to try to get them back as close as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And you're talking about like
10
losing muscle
days.
mass if you're in bed. A lot of these people are very sick, right?
Yeah.
She talked about high acuity. That means, very sick,
Yep.
right? So individuals that are very sick, we can still take, and we can manage a lot of things. We have, very skilled nurses.
Yep.
We have physicians on staff. We can do dialysis. We can do IV drips, things like that.
Okay.
We don't intubate, so that level of care we would send back to the
Probably
acute care
LTAC or
hospital.
something, but yeah.
But, we can manage a lot of things medically.
Okay.
And we take some very sick patients and get dramatic results.
If I have a great grandmother who's concerned about going to rehab because she's like, Brian, I can't do 3 hours of PT a day. So I'm sure you guys hear that comment quite a bit, because I'm like, she's 98 years old. Can she really tolerate 3 hours? It can be as intensive as they want, correct? But we can also, we can make it as appropriate for them as we can. Is that right?
It's time intensive, but it's not like, we're having grandma do squats or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's very modifiable to that level.
So they shouldn't be concerned about the time involved. Should not be a fear factor for them or contribute to that.
We modify it to their level.
Yes. And the word intense, scares people. So we just let them know that we can break up the therapy.
It's not Navy SEALs training.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And just to go off what Justin was saying, a couple of things is one, my mom did have a UTI and she was there, and Dr. Figueroa did an amazing job. She was almost septic, got her back up. She was delirious and got her back up and moving. But just to say, those are the types of things that we can get them to come in, and they don't have to go to the ER. So if you had a patient that was going, that had a UTI, and that they had a UTI, I could admit them. If they're traditional Medicare, I could admit them that same day, make sure that they go back to you on service, and you won't get that RTA, because you'll get with PDGEM program, you'll get that institution rate.
That we'll be getting therapy 3 hours a day too.
Yeah, you'll be going back to
the decline that we typically see after going to the hospital for a few days could be reduced.
It's amazing. Another thing is, just to go back to the insurances, just make sure that when you get your insurance if it's an Advantage plan, just make sure you have IRF benefits. It'll be IRF or inpatient.
IRF is IRF, inpatient rehab facility.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
So it'll say it in their plan.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And another thing, just to educate about, going to skilled nursing facilities, there are some that are good, that are out there. I mean, we know there's some.
I work with several of them. Yeah.
Yes. And they're good. So just go to Medicare.gov and just look and see what was said and what the star ratings are. I mean, ask people, get educated. Don't feel so overwhelmed. I mean, or call me. I am in there every day.
Yeah.
But or call you. We are both educators. Yeah. Justin's an educator. We're in the skilled nursings every day. Just go there and just kind of see what's going on. We are fully staffed, so that's not even a question. Sometimes the skilled nursings aren't, and that's where another huge challenge comes in, is because they're not staffed and we are.
Got it.
So I wouldn't advocate for anything less than working for Pam, because I truly believe in it, because I've had my mom twice.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
what are the questions you guys hear from prospective, either social workers at the hospital level, physicians, or even family members who are calling you going, hey, we're thinking about sending her over here to your facility, your rehab facility. What questions do they typically ask you that would be helpful for the audience to know, outside of what we've already discussed?
just like what we can manage.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of times. So at our Richmond location, we have pressurized rooms. We can take COVID positive patients or any kind of respiratory therapy issues.
Okay.
We have dialysis. What can we manage from IV antibiotics, things like that. We can do so we can do a lot of things medically.
Okay.
That most people aren't aware of.
Yeah. Private rooms, private baths.
Yep. Private room, private
It's
bath.
very, very clean.
When y'all finish with them, though, you guys, your rehab department, you guys do a multidisciplinary case conference, right? So all the disciplines are signing off and saying, hey, this one looks like they're going to be ready to go home, whatever home looks like, in the next week or so. And then your case managers or your social workers are then coordinating with care downstream, right? To make sure that there's an appropriate handoff, right? Because the last thing we want is, and we see statistics on this stuff too. The last thing we want is someone who's appropriate for continued care at the home site, and those orders never go out, or it's delayed by a week, or somebody never goes out. But you guys have been pretty good about, or really good actually, about making sure that the collaboration happens before the patient's discharging. So again, for family members, they're not being concerned, okay, what's next? Like, you guys are already being proactive.
From the beginning.
This is the next thing that's going to happen. Here's how we're going to coordinate. Here's who we're going to connect you guys with.
Yeah, from the very beginning, our social workers and case managers are there talking to the families and letting them know what's going on. They're introducing themselves, like literally the first day they do an assessment. Yeah. And just to go back with insurances, they approve for 7 days usually. Okay. But then we'll go and we'll reassess, and then, they'll get, maybe 7 more days. It just kind of depends on where they're at. But the family will know every step of the way on what's going on.
Awesome.
So we really try to pride ourselves on high level medical management. And we try to take them through the whole spectrum, right? So that starts while you're in the hospital. Traditionally, that's where a majority of ours come from. And navigators
secondary market.
And secondary market.
Okay, right. So you mentioned that a couple of different times. So I know what that means. Yeah, can you explain what that means?
Yeah. But like Michelle's one of our case navigators, right? And so she's bedside, talking to case management about, hey, tell me about some of the patients you have. Oh, this patient might be appropriate. Okay, let me look at their clinical information. Let me go talk to the patient, talk to the family. And we try to, communicate effectively and manage all the process for them throughout, right? So we get them in with us. We'll help them through the authorization process with insurance, all of that, get them in with us. And then our case managers at our facilities, we'll look at, do they need equipment when they go home? Is that a walker? Is that a bedside commode? Because maybe, they can't, transfer all the way to the bathroom just yet, depending on their situation. Or anything else they might need. Do they need, home respiratory care with oxygen? Do we set them up with home nursing with home health companies or home therapy? So some of these companies, home health companies, manage nursing and therapy, some only therapy. So we'll navigate all of that with them. We'll get the orders in place. We'll make follow-up appointments, help them coordinate that for when they get discharged. Great. Communicate all that to family. Package it all up, give it to them. But it doesn't end there. Like, we can still be a resource, right? And not just to our patients, but, to the companies we work with.
Absolutely.
Yes, and we'll follow up after they're discharged as well. The case managers will call and see how they're doing and, make sure that everything was ordered correctly. But I just wanted to touch on another subject really quick, is just on how to get the referrals. I know that's always with us. Like, what do we do? How do we get stuff? So just to let you guys know, and to be educated on it, is that if you guys want post-acute care, let them know. Let the hospital know that you guys are fighting, for your loved one, and that we can come in and do a bedside assessment. I know we touched on a little bit that before, but we have navigators in every single hospital. Okay. So no matter what, just ask for the referral to be sent to us, and then one of the navigators will be there to go do an assessment.
Okay. And then the secondary market.
The secondary market, right? So your assisted living facilities, independent living facilities, skilled nursing facilities.
So primary market would be like at the hospital site.
Sorry,
the secondary short-term acute care hospitals, right? Your big hospital systems where you're going to the ER traditionally. Okay. Not like the urgent cares that are like on every corner. But if you go to a big hospital that has an ER, that's your short-term acute care hospital, right? Okay.
And we can do direct admit from the ER.
Yes, we can do it. So let's say you go to their ER or one of these freestanding ERs. We can do direct admits there. So that's the freestanding ERs are part of our secondary market. Yes. Right. Physician offices, right? So we admitted a patient who went to the physician office who was deconditioned. This was one of your patients, who was deconditioned, went and saw his cardiologist. And it was like, man, it is just taking so much more energy these days. Like, I don't know if I got sick or what happened, but now I put on my pants and I have to sit there for like 5 minutes catching my breath before I can put my shirt on. And he's like, this is different, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, this is come on. And if I keep this track, like it's making me very scared and nervous the direction I'm going. And the cardiologist was like, well, I think you need to probably go to rehab. And so
straight to rehab, no hospital stay, no ER. That's awesome.
You know, medically, there was no urgency, right? There's nothing he could find medically with labs, testing that was like, you know, oh, you're dealing with this underlying disease process.
Sure.
It was, oh, you're just getting deconditioned. And, you know, I can't really find a reason why, but let's send you to rehab. And I can still round on you there. I'll come see you as your cardiologist, make sure that, you know, talk to their PM&R docs, you know, get labs there, keep track on you medically. And that person came, I think they were with us for 12 days. Went home again, you know, raving reviews about their experience and, you know, so much healthier. They had been losing weight. Yeah. And they're raving about our food, which you don't usually hear about in hospital settings. Man, the food is great here. You know, I've asked for extra bacon. They didn't do that, but everything else was good, you know? And so gained weight while they were with us, gained strength, function through the roof. Like demeanor was much better. You know, talking to the family, they're like, man, it looked very bleak there looking at my dad. And now he's just a different person.
And normally that would have been a hospital event, right? Or close.
If we would have let it continue to go on, right? So who knows? He goes home in maybe 5 more days. Now he can't get out of bed.
It's much more proactive.
Family's taken to the ER, right?
It's so much better to be proactive.
Yeah.
You know,
in
these types of situations, especially if, I mean, you're out there, you see them. Yeah. And so when they have a UTI or if they are, you know, if they are deconditioned, then the best thing to do is just ask us to do an assessment because, you know, no matter what, we'll be able to pick them up.
There's no charge to the assessment. You guys come out. Is this appropriate? Can we help you? Gotcha.
Well, and a lot of the time the S-techs are discharging and they'll come home and they'll just exactly what Justin said. They're not ready to go home. They'll still have bronchitis or their Parkinson's flared up or, you know, whatever that those comorbidities are reflecting.
Or they don't have the social support at home, right? Like, like their loved one is going to work during the day if they're young, right? Or if they're geriatric and they're like, well, you know, my son or daughter has to go to work during the day, so I'm by myself and I can't really do a lot. So now we're getting that deconditioning you're talking about where they're just, you know, sitting all day, laying all day, you know, and maybe not eating enough because they're not getting up and preparing meals for themselves. And you start this like downward spiral. So if we can be proactive on the front end, and even if it's not with us, right? Like if we have to identify like, hey, it's not appropriate for you to come to us yet or at all, but we'll help with the process. You know what I mean?
Right. And they need to know that because if they go to sniff and they want to be able to be picked up, I think we mentioned that before, I can definitely pick them up and fight for a case to get them to come over to us. So don't feel like you're lost and, you know, overwhelmed and frustrated if you're at a skilled nursing facility and you want to come to PAM, you still have that option and fight for that right to come. Because a lot of times I'll speak with the families and they'll say, you know, well, the nurses are telling me that I can't do the 3 hours of therapy. Again, let us make that decision. We have clinical navigators that are there that can go see and do the assessment and see the patient and make sure that they are appropriate for us. And I will pick them up. I'm kind of like the grim reaper in skilled nursing. Sorry about that.
But like I said, we can spread that out, right? So let's say you can't do 3 hours and it's not 3 straight hours. We break it up throughout the day. Like if you do an hour in the morning, you know, an hour before after lunch, an hour in late afternoon, like it doesn't feel like that much. It goes by quick, right? Because it's all modified. We give appropriate rest breaks, all of that. But there are situations, you know, going back on that it is appropriate maybe to go to a skilled facility, right? You know, if you're an individual who fell off a ladder and broke both your legs and you're non-weight bearing for 6 weeks, well, it might not be best for you to come to us immediately because we're not going to be able to take advantage of, you know, where you're at. So let's go and let your bone healing happen and that process to go through and get repeat imaging. And they say, okay, it's appropriate for you to start weight bearing. Okay, well now
then
maybe come
transition.
To us. Right? So there are cases where we work with skilled nursing facilities because they're not the appropriate patient for us in that window, but maybe later on they are.
Gotcha.
And that's where like a Michelle would come in and would track
assessments.
Keep on track with that patient over the course of their stay. And like, hey, did you have your follow-up with your orthopedist? You did? Okay. Did they say you're appropriate to weight bear now? Oh, on this leg you can? Well, that's enough to where we can start doing gait training, strength training, get you higher functioning so we can get you back home with family.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
This has been really good information.
Yes.
I so appreciate you guys coming. This has been
awesome.
Thank
you for having us.
What is the best way for them to get in touch with y'all? Email?
Email is good. Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Oh gosh, it's mcampabasso@pamrehab.com. My phone number is 469-406-9790. And I'm always ready for a tour in Allen and Richardson.
I think you should probably spell that out.
I know.
We'll put it on the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
on
okay.
the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Justin Newman, Jane Newman 2 at pamrehab.com. So JNEWMAN 2.
2 Justin Newmans.
Well, yeah, there's a Josie Newman.
Oh.
And we just had a leadership conference in Austin, and they're like, Justin Newman, have you met Josie Newman? I was like, you're the Jay Newman that stole my email.
I have number 2.
And she's like, I've been there for like 15 years. I deserve it.
Funny. All right. Well, thank you all again so
Thank
much.
you so
This has
much,
been a blast.
Brian.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for having
Yeah,
us.
All right. Sweet.
It's been a pleasure.